Welcome to Judaism Today, our program, My Brother Jonathan, with our guest, Carol Pollard. Carol Pollard is the sister of Jonathan Pollard, who is serving a life sentence in a maximum security federal prison. Carol, welcome to Judaism Today.
Thank you.
As we have discussed, this is probably one of the most difficult programs that we've had to do. But
not
I think
for me.
for us it is, because this is not really our style, but frankly, I feel that the subject is important enough for us to go out of our way to make sure that this subject is discussed appropriately before the Jewish community and before the community at large, because there are things that have to be understood. So as I said, welcome to Judaism Today. Could you just introduce the program by giving us some idea of what is it that led up to your brother's arrest and charge?
In 1985, Jonathan was working as a civilian for the Navy. He was a civilian analyst, and he saw information come across his desk concerning Syrian and Iraqi chemical and nuclear production, and a whole host of other things, but those were the most important thing. And he asked why this information was not being given to Israel, because there was a treaty for the exchange of this information. But his immediate superiors were selectively ignoring their obligation to give this material. So in essence, we have an overt government. The President of the United States says, yes, give this material. Let's keep Israel alive. Let's give her the stuff that's needed to keep her in a position of being alive. And then we have a covert government that says, no, put a stranglehold on this information. In fact, the question is, does the United States have a right to put a country to death? Which is basically what they were doing. Jonathan was heavily conflicted by what he did. He had a presidential order that said yes to give the information. He has his immediate superiors that say no, don't. In fact, he broke the law by going around his immediate superiors. He gave it anyway. He plea bargained. He said he did it. They entered into a plea bargain with him. They said, well, you didn't do any treason, you didn't harm the United States, and what people usually get in that situation is 2 to 4 years, which is what the plea bargain stated. They would go for what the norm was. And Caspar Weinberger came in at the last minute in this hearing. He never had a trial, had a hearing in camera, in secret. With this memo, Caspar Weinberger comes in and he says, give Jonathan Pollard the stiffest possible sentence commensurate with the treason that he did, even though he was never accused of it. The district court got the message. They gave him life with no hope for parole. So he's serving life with no hope for parole, 23 hours a day in isolation right now, a couple floors below the ground. He hasn't seen a tree in 3.5 years. He doesn't see the sky. I don't think anybody, who would plea bargain for a life sentence?
We'll get back to some of these issues in a moment, but one issue I think is important to come to grips with, and that is the whole question of guilt or innocence. The idea of was what Jonathan did a crime, and how do we deal with that kind of issue?
Well, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin said he performed a sin for the sake of heaven. It's a conflict. Jonathan Pollard even said he was guilty. But what he was guilty of is something very interesting. He was guilty of giving information that should have been given anyway. That's what he's guilty of. Now, he's also guilty of not following his immediate superiors, because in the Navy, you follow the person who's right above you, and he did not do that. But he certainly did not commit treason. And what we think is the sentence is disproportionate. I mean, I don't go around the country talking about his innocence. I go around talking about the disproportionate sentence he got, which was life with no parole, when spying for an ally usually gets 2 to 4 years.
So basically you accept the notion that he is guilty, he did violate the law.
Yeah, but what he's guilty of is what, and the sentence have to be really looked at very closely. I mean, just to give you a case in point, if you're looking, what we're looking for is equal justice under our laws. There's an Egyptian American, his name is Helmy. He spied for Egypt. He gave information that extended the range of the Scud missile to Egypt, who then gave it to Iraq. And guess what? During the Gulf War, our boys and girls met those extended range Scuds, just like the people in Tel Aviv did. Helmy's charge was reduced to smuggling because the United States government wanted to maintain cordial relations with Egypt. And guess what he got as a sentence? 4 years reduced to 2 good time. Is this equal justice under our laws? What's going on here? I think Jonathan Pollard's sentence is political vengeance.
So basically your approach is to question the sentence rather than whether or not he was guilty of anything.
I don't think
you accept the notion that he
notion.
violated the law.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the sentence is just way out of line.
Could you give us a little more of what happened with his plea bargain agreement? How did that transpire?
Well, he said that he did. He automatically said he did it. He wasn't going to lie or try to make concessions that maybe he did it for certain reasons. He just said, I did it. I did it. And what happened was they said, well, a grand jury spent many months studying this case and came to the conclusion that he had not harmed the United States in any way. So they said, okay, let's enter into a plea agreement because we want to keep this problem between Israel and the United States secret. Remember, this is 1985. The Gulf War didn't happen until last year, 91. And problems between Israel and the United States shouldn't surface. They want a hearing in camera. Let's enter into a plea bargain because you got nothing to lose. You're going to sign this plea bargain. It says we're only going to ask 2 to 4 years, not a life sentence, and let's keep it all secret. What happened was he did enter into this plea bargain. His wife was ailing in prison. They kept withholding medication from her at the same time also. That's a whole other story. But this was going right along. They were withholding medication, pressuring him into signing this plea bargain, and they were also saying to him, we don't want problems between the United States and Israel to come to the foreground. So he had a hearing.
The government prosecutors were,
yes.
They accepted the plea bargain agreement?
They're the ones who did it.
They're the ones who did it?
Yeah, they're the ones that said it was
So they were party to it?
Not only party to it, they're the ones that constructed this whole thing. They think the big thing that they kept telling Jonathan Pollard was, things will go easier on you. You do what we say and things will go easier on you. Besides, you entered into a plea bargain, what do you have to worry about? All of a sudden, he goes into this hearing in the 11th hour. 1 hour before that hearing, in camera, in secret, Caspar Weinberger, Secretary of Defense, sends a memo to the judge asking for the stiffest possible sentence. And that's why the judge has the discretion, always the discretion to disregard a plea agreement, but 99% of the time, they never do. They just take it as this is a plea agreement, this is what needs to be followed. But because Caspar Weinberger, who was then Secretary of Defense, said this to the judge in a memo that, commensurate with the greatest treason, and he never had committed treason, that the judge apparently went along with Caspar Weinberger. It's interesting to know right now Caspar Weinberger may be indicted, which for us, for this case, is a real boon, because what I feel is if Caspar Weinberger is indicted for lying in the Iran-Contra hearings, then what we can say is basically, here's the same man who brought you Jonathan Pollard. I think that should be looked at very carefully. Very, very
So
carefully.
actually, what ultimately happened with the plea bargain, was it actually a formal agreement per se?
Oh yeah, it's in writing.
It was in writing.
Yep.
And what happened to it? It just
Well, it's there. We're
dissipated?
arguing. No, it's there.
Is it still on record?
Oh, it's still on record, but you see what the prosecution will say is that the judge could disregard it because he has that ability to do it, even though 99% of the cases he doesn't. He had the ability to. It was within our legal system. If you go to Canada, this is not true. But I think the thing you need to look at very carefully is that after Jonathan went through this plea bargain, he was given the life sentence with no hope for parole. He was whisked away to a ward for the criminally insane. It's the same place where Jeffrey Dahmer is now residing, with no need for treatment stamped on his papers, except that a list was sent to him on a monthly basis, a list of 25 prominent Jewish Americans. And what the prosecution said, Jonathan, you want out of here? Sign off on one of those names as being part of your operation. And he said, I took 9 months of polygraphing, no one is involved. And they kept shoving that list under his face. You know who was on that list? It's really interesting. Hadassah's national president, Ruth Popkin, Morris Abrams, who was head of the Council of Presidents of major Jewish organizations. I mean, these are big-time spies, quote unquote. Although probably what they were looking at doing was, if they could get an accomplice situation going here, then maybe they could take away Hadassah's tax-free status or cause some problem in the Jewish community this way. Now, the only reason he got out of that ward for the criminally insane is because Congressman Lee Hamilton said he was coming to visit Jonathan. And they whisked him away to Marion, which is a level 6 prison. He doesn't belong there. He belongs in a level 2, level 3, as I'm led to believe, not in a level 6. That's the highest. That's like the Alcatraz of prisons.
Is there any explanation of why they're holding him in that kind of imprisonment?
They say it's because his life is in danger, but yet the prosecution put his life in danger in the first place. No one knew what he did until the prosecutor got out in the front steps of the courthouse after the hearing and said he gave information concerning Syrian, Iraqi chemical and nuclear buildup. He gave information about Libyan radar installations, Russian military equipment pouring into Arab states, and you know what else he gave, which was like the straw that broke the camel's back, was information on planned PLO attacks on Israeli civilians. And it was stamped NFFE, not for foreign eyes. He gave that information anyway. And it was supposed to go to Israel. By right of treaty, all this was supposed to go. And so when the Arab states found out about this, they got kind of crazy on us and said, the Aryan Brotherhood got into it, black Muslims got into it, and said, well, you know, this is not something that we should, the prosecutor said, we shouldn't send him to a regular prison. We have to do this for his own safety. But no one knew what he did until the prosecutor got out in the steps of the courthouse and said it.
But the reason that is given is that they say
for
that
his
for
own
his
safety.
own protection.
Yeah.
How about visitors? What kind of visitors can you get?
Not many. My husband and I get to go, my mother and father get to go to see him. Rabbi Avi Weiss from Riverdale fought his way in. Just this past month, a few people have gotten in, and the reason why is that we've been fighting in court to get him more prison visits. And so Ed McAteer of the Christian Roundtable went in. Israel Madad of the Knesset Caucus for Jonathan. There's a caucus in the Knesset for Jonathan Pollard, and he got to come over here. Several lawyers of his that have never even got to see him finally got in to see him.
Now, what was the reason why they weren't allowed to see him?
You're going to laugh at this, but I'm telling you this is exactly, I swear to you, they said it was for security reasons. Right.
With no explanation?
No, it doesn't have to be explanation. Nothing had, just the security reason he can't come. And right now, the only people who are getting in there have to, an NSA person, a national security person has to be present in the room, where the father Walker, the spy, he gets to have reporters come and visit him for hours on end. There's no NSA person in there. I must add something here. The Walker clan spied for 17 years and many millions of dollars for an enemy, Russia. Jonathan got a worse sentence than they did. He got life with no hope for parole. And I think that this really needs to be looked at. They were accused, the father and son were accused of 5 counts of treason, accused and indicted. Jonathan was never accused of treason, and he got life with no hope for parole.
What are some of the best explanations that you've heard as to why all of this has happened this way?
I think you have to look at our foreign policy.
I would ask that, try to, rather than gut feel or things, it's something that people can really...
Well, Weinberger sent the memorandum to the court, and I believe he did this because he has a policy called even-handedness, or level battlefield in the military terminology. It means, and this is his own words, Israel should not be too strong in relation to her Arab neighbors. That means Israel, the size of Vermont, should not be too strong in relation to the whole rest of the Arab world, which is the size of the rest of 23 states of the United States. He was personally infuriated by what Jonathan did. He said, I'd hang him if I could. Worst traitor in the 20th century, totally ignoring the Walkers, Howard, Davis, Lone Tree, Pelton, and Chin. He got on his high horse about this case, and it was his memo to the judge. And he'd never sent a memo up to the Walkers judge. We were never even allowed to see that memo, by the way. When does a man get sentenced in this country, never being allowed to see the information against him? The memo is considered classified, and our lawyers who do have top security clearance cannot see that memo. But I think, you have to see this in terms of what Weinberger and company were trying to do to the United States in terms of foreign policy. Our foreign policy in the 80s, these are the dictates of our foreign policy. Iraq is our friend. Syria is our friend. Jordan is our friend. Saudi Arabia is our friend. Israel is expendable. And Jonathan Pollard got in the way. He's what I call a selective creation of the reality of certain people in our government that have nothing to do with what really happened. I say his sentence is political vengeance. I think that if Weinberger's memo came to light, you'd see it for what it is. And we really have to fight, because I'll tell you something, this happens to one American, and it happens to everybody.
One other question about the result of the plea bargain agreement. Mm-hmm. In the event that the plea bargain agreement is not fulfilled, is there any recourse with that?
Well, you see, the judge has the right to overrule it, even though 99% of the time he doesn't overrule it. He has the right, so it doesn't mean anything.
But doesn't that then undermine the pleading guilty?
No, in our court system, no. In our court system, you enter into a plea bargain, it goes to the sentencing judge. The sentencing judge looks at it and goes, oh, you two have entered, the prosecution and defense, you've entered into a plea bargain. And he or she should say, okay, this is what I'm going to give you. What happened was someone else came in, this Weinberger comes in through the back door and says, no, give him the worst. And he has the right, he's within his right, in this court system in the United States.
That doesn't allow a provision for withdrawing the plea.
Well, we're trying to withdraw.
That's part of the appeal, I guess.
It's part of the appeal.
We'll get to a little more discussion about the appeal. What has been the reaction of the American Jewish community?
At first, it was just total paranoia, running away from the case, because there were two cases tried here, one in the press and one in the legal system. The press was given information, well, I call it dissembled information, by the government, by the U.S. government, that he was a drug user, mentally unstable, an alcoholic, that turned the Jewish population of this country away from him. And they never questioned the fact that looking at the legal documents, this had nothing in it. The stuff that was dissembled to the public was, trust us. The government said, trust us. We know what terrible things he did to the United States. But I have a simple question to ask. And I asked this on Larry King Live to one of the Justice people who was, the Justice Department people who was opposite me. I said, if he did something so terrible, how come he was never accused of treason? And he had no answer for me. So there's a lot of lies that have been dissembled about Jonathan Pollard, the worst of which was that he took money. Even the sentencing judge said that the money was for operational expenses and never fined him any monies that were accepted personally. What happened was, Ollie North was fined $50,000 for money he accepted personally. So what were these operational expenses? Well, every Friday, Weinberger used to go to the Saudi embassy and used to tell them about Israeli defense systems, the American defense systems that were being sold to Israel. Every Sunday, Jonathan used to pay a Saudi official to tell him what Weinberger was telling the Saudis about Israeli defense systems. So what we've got here is a case of a head of Department of Defense dealing with a non-ally. Saudi Arabia is not on our official allies list, with information that he never should have given in the first place. And I feel this is the reason why Jonathan Pollard could never have had a trial. Never. Because it would have brought to light Weinberger's giving this information to Saudi Arabia, which was totally illegal. Maybe he should be accused of treason. That's where the treason charge should be put and should be leveled.
What's been the reaction of the Israeli community?
At first it was
State of Israel.
Yeah, at first they backed away from him. They said it was a rogue operation, that they had nothing to do with it. Then they came around and started asking for him unofficially. In fact, I believe they've asked for him quite a number of times. But he's too convenient a symbol for the American government. Here he is, whenever there's AWAC sales in Congress, Jonathan Pollard's pictures on the front page of the Washington Post, Jew, traitor, spy. It doesn't matter, he's never accused of treason. Right next to it is AWAC sale in Congress today. AWACS aren't the problem. AWACS are surveillance planes. It's all those agreements, those oral agreements that were made between the President of the United States and Saudi Arabia, the King of Saudi Arabia, that passed through riding on these AWAC sales that the Congress and the American people don't even know about. Why we went to war in the Middle East and in this last Gulf War, some people think it was to save Israel. Wrong, folks. It's to save our super base network, our supercomputers, our military technology, which is in Saudi Arabia. That's why. We had to save it. There's two ruling factions in Saudi Arabia. One of them is pro-United States. The other one is pro-Muslim fundamental, like Saddam Hussein. He's a Muslim fundamentalist. If one overthrows the other, God help us, we lose the whole kit and caboodle. That's why we had to go to war over there. That's why.
But again, what is the official position, let's say, of the Israeli government?
Their official position is they're trying to ask for him back. They're trying to get him back. They feel that 6 years ago, they were so scared. They were scared and they ran. And they're trying to make amends for it now. I think they're trying in a lot of different ways. They talk officially, they talk unofficially. They meet with people in the government. They've been doing this for the past 6 years. But he's too convenient a symbol for the Americans to get up. He's great. Bludgeon over the head of the American Jewish community, bludgeon over the head of Israel. Wow, it's a great symbol. But it doesn't have anything to do with reality. The reality is we had a treaty to exchange this information. The question is, why was it being ignored? Why was information being given to Israel that was so doctored that it was useless? that in a war, and there was a war buildup going on in '85. I mean, people always ask me, how come Jonathan didn't give this information to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal? You know, he become a whistleblower and not a spy. There wasn't enough time, because if you remember the '73 war, Israel didn't get enough information to sustain herself during that war, and there was even less being given in '85. Jonathan had to do something fast. And maybe it wasn't the right thing to do, maybe it wasn't legally right, but it may have been morally correct to save lives.
What are some of the bases that are being used for the appeals at this point?
Well, there's several things. One is that the government said they were not going to seek a life sentence, and in fact they did through Weinberger's memorandum. There was a hostage plea entered into with Jonathan and his wife, and that plea, we don't know if it's illegal or not, but we're hoping the Supreme Court will rule whether it is or not. Both of them had to plead guilty. She to being an accessory after the fact, which usually doesn't have a sentence. Him to being, it's one of the lowest levels of the espionage statute, which he pled, which was passing classified information to an ally. And that usually gets 2 to 4 years. But they wanted that plea. It's a hostage plea, it's what it's called, and the Supreme Court has not ruled whether those are in fact legal.
What's a hostage plea?
Well, one has to plead guilty and the other has to plead, they have to plead guilty together. They're locked in pleas. And that may be essentially illegal, but no one knows that because the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on it yet. Plus, I mean, there are other issues. Did in fact the government breach its agreement with Jonathan? You know, we contend that Jonathan entered into a contract with the government. The contract was breached by the government. Now we're seeking redress. So there's a number of different issues that are involved here, plus the life sentence being too extreme. He just had a very interesting go-around with the appellate court. He had 3 judges last September. 3 judges ruled on this. I mean, they heard the case. And one of the judges leaned down to the prosecutor and said, "How in God's name could you justify Weinberger's use of the word treason in his memorandum to the court?" And the prosecutor said, "It was regrettable. It was regrettable." And another one said, "Well, I guess this shows you better be awful careful in dealing with the U.S. government." What happened was March 21st, the 3 judges did do a ruling. 2 were against having a trial. 1 was for. The 2 against said that they thought the case had merit, plenty of merit. They ruled on technicalities. They said, "We didn't apply in time. I don't know when justice has a time limit." See, that's why I say it's very I think it's political. And let me finish. And the other thing was that they didn't want to comment about the life sentence he was given, which means they didn't want to buck horns with Aubrey Robinson Jr. And the judge that voted for having his appeal said, in fact, he called the prosecutor and the Justice Department juggling fiends. He quoted Macbeth. He said there was definitely a breach of law, and he needs to have his day in court or else be resentenced, one or the other.
At this point, what would you say to the American people and the Jewish community and the community at large? What would you ask for?
I think that I would plead for understanding in this case, which many people don't have. They've run from it, and they continue to run from it blindly. They really need to look at it and need to see what the government did in this case and how they're using it. And I especially wanted to say that this is an American injustice. And if he had been a French-American spying for France or a German-American spying for Germany, the charge of dual loyalty would never have been leveled against him. It's usually by Jews against Jews, and this is something we really have to stop.
What would you ask people to do?
I think they can write, you know, Governor Clinton came out saying that he would seek a sentence commensurate with the crime Jonathan Pollard did, which was 2 to 4 years. He already said it. I think people need to write to Clinton, Bush, and Perot and say to them, we care about him. What are you going to do about him? You know, our votes are up for grabs, especially if you're members of a large community organization, to tell them that you're a member of that organization and tell them that you want to influence this organization to vote for some particular person. But what is the stand on Pollard? Because a vote for someone who stands up for Pollard is a vote for legal action in the United States, a legal action that's going to count.
If, in one sentence, what would you say have we learned from this experience?
I'm going to give you a quote that Jonathan Pollard gave me the second day he was incarcerated in Washington, D.C. jail. I went to see him and I asked him why he did what he did. He said, "Do you know what I did?" I said, "I'm really not sure." And he leaned over to that glass partition and he looked at me and he said, "Silence in the face of tyranny never buys security. Never buys security." And I think it's something we as Americans and Jews in particular need to learn.
Our time is up. I thank you so much for coming down and taking this time with us, and I wish you good luck, both
Thank
you
you.
and your brother.
Thanks a lot.
And I hope everything can come to an end that we can be happy with.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'd like to thank our guest for joining us for this program. We hope you will tune in for our next program in the series, Judaism Today. Judaism Today is brought to you by the New Jersey region of the United Synagogue of America. We welcome your comments and suggestions, and we invite you to write to us at the United Synagogue of America, Deerfield Road and Academy Terrace, Linden, New Jersey, 07036. That's the United Synagogue of America, Deerfield Road and Academy Terrace, Linden, New Jersey, 07036.